Hi, welcome back once again. So this is the last video of our three-part series using Appwrite and Flutter. In the last video we saw how you can authenticate your user and make first request towards creating an user and inserting data into your database. Using that concepts, we'll now develop an Todo application using Appwrite as a server. Some of the key features of our Todo application would be ability to add tasks, delete a single task, delete all tasks, mark task as being done, and being able to filter unfinished and completed tasks. So let's get started. Now, before we start inserting our data into our database, we need to define a schema for the same, right? So how do we define a schema for it? Into your application, if you go to a database section, let's close this. You might be wondering, like in the last video we created this collection and this collection had this attributes, right? Now we won't be needing this kind of a schema, so let's just delete these documents. So what kind of a schema we would be following, right? So, and let's also delete this document and this attribute, right? And create a new attribute. So the first attribute would be a content, as in what task is to be done, and let's give it a size of 256. It would be a required field and it's not an array, right? So let's create this. One more attribute which we would be needing is, let's say, ID. Its size would be same 256 and it would also be a required ID, and let's create this. And one more attribute which we would be needing is an Boolean attribute, and this would be like if the task is whether completed or not. So let's name this attribute as is complete. Its default value would be false, because as soon as you create a task you haven't completed the task, so its default value would be false. And let's say this value is not required, and create this. Okay, so this is the schema of a data, in which as soon as a user adds a task, it would have a content, an ID, and a flag known as is complete. So as we have defined this task onto a Flutter application, we also need to define a model for it. So let's create a file known as todo.dart, and here we will be creating a model for getting this task and also pushing this task to our database. So let's create a class known as todo, and it would have parameters like content and is complete, string ID. Now let's create a constructor. This dot content and is complete, which would be by default false, and it also requires the ID. Alright, now we'll need a directory which would be dart convert import dart convert, right? So why do we need dart convert? It's because the objects which we will be getting from the database, we need to pass it into our own object and then display it onto a screen, right? So this dart convert would help us to pass our JSON object into our todo object, and so that we can display the data into a screen. So the first step is to create a factory constructor. So let's create a factory constructor, and this would be from JSON. It would take the string and map it from map, and it will json.decode and just simply decode this string. from map function is not defined, right? So let's just create a 2JSON and it would be json.encode. We are having two types of objects. One is json.encode and json.decode. So instead of decoder, it would be json.decode, and here we would be just decoding it to map. Now we need to create this from map, which is this method, and to map method, right? So from map is to, the value which we are getting from database, which we would extract that data value from the JSON object and pass it into our own object, and while pushing data to our database, we would use that existing object which we have created for to do, encode into it JSON, and then send it to our database, right? So let's create these two functions, these two methods. So the first is our from map. So what things it would need? It would need a map of string and dynamic, and let's say its name is JSON. It would convert into a to do, right? So for content, just parse the content which is coming from the JSON. Is complete, just parse so is complete, and the last is ID. So to parse this ID, we would be using something known as U0024 ID. It just used to convert the format of the string. Now we are getting some errors. Let's just close this map string. And what else do we have? To do dot from map string. It says expected to find. Okay, let's just close this. And where are we getting an error? All right. Now we have created this from map function. We also need a function for to map. So it would be string dynamic to map, and let's just create an object of that map. Where I will just map the values of content, is complete, and ID. And the last is my ID. Yep. So we are done creating a model class. So you might be seeing that it's a lot of text to write, right? And if we have more fields, we need to manually, construct from map and to map functions. Well, that's not the case. There are many online tools such as quicktype.io and many code generators also available, which will generate this code for you on your behalf. So you don't have to write much of boilerplate code. Now, for the state management for this project, we won't be using any state management library like Provider, Riverpod, Block, or Getx, or any such kind of library, just to keep things simple. And this tutorial is focused towards someone who is a beginner towards Flutter and Appwrite. I won't be using any state management library. So, well, that said, we have created a to-do model class, and the next thing is go to my services, and inside my services I need to create one more to do dot. Let's say to do's dot, and this would contain a class which would have different methods for, let's say, creating a to do, fetching all the to do's, and updating a to do, deleting all to do's, kind of that stuff, right? So let's just start developing this, and once we are done with this, then we'll move to our UI part. So let's say my name of my class is to do's, and I need to create a database object. So it's database, and it's appwrite dot instance dot client, right? Nothing new here. Similarly, how you created an account object is the same way you create a database object, right? So let's say the first function which you would need is like fetching all the to-dos which are present in the database, right? So let's say the name of my function is fetch, and what it will do, it will store all the to-dos which are coming from the database as a document. And so how you can get all the documents is like databases dot, and there is a function known as list documents. So if you hover over this list documents, you can see it gets a list of all users document in a given collection, right? So if a user has been created, all his document means all the to-dos which he have inserted or which he have created. I need all of those to-dos to show into my home page, right? And what does it require is a database ID and a collection ID. Remember, we created this database ID and collection ID into our constants.dart. So let's use that database ID, and this would be, now for that we need to import a constants folder, constants.dart as constants, constants.appwrite, and it would be database ID, and my collection ID would be constants.appwrite collection ID, and mark this as asynchronous. Now I need to return the documents which I am getting, right? So for returning, I need to define a return type, and this return type would be a list of to do, and that to do is the object model which I just created. So now I need to return this list of to do's, with a list of to do's or list of documents which I am getting from the database. So how would I return? Just type return document list. Now I need to map all these objects, map all the documents of this object to a to do from map. Now it would take all my data and convert it into a list, right? This is how you can fetch all the documents or fetch all the to-dos. Now the second function which I need is to create an to-do. So creating an to-do will obviously require the text which needs to be, the task which needs to be done. So this will contain a required string of content, and it would return a future to do. So let's create a document, and similarly just click on databases and create document. All this documentation is available on the Appwrite in simple and easy to understand language. So if you have any errors or you face any difficulty understanding this, or you need to explore more onto your own, just move towards, just head over to the Appwrite documentation, and that would serve your purpose. Now let's just pass all the required fields in my create document. So the first is my database ID. So my database ID is constants. Just copy this. Okay, what else do we know is a document ID. So to just have an unique ID overall, you can use unique ID the same way as you did for creating an user ID. And the last is the data. So that data is basically, I would be just entering my content. Alright, so mark this function as asynchronous, and we need to return something, right? What should we return? You should think I'm creating a document, right? And document is getting inserted into the database. Now that database should reflect the changes into my home screen. So for that, I would be returning a to do from map, and just the document that I have been returned while after creating this data into my database, I would just use this data, right? As simple as that. Now similarly, if you just copy this, change create to let's say update. Now for updating, you need to require that whole to do. So instead of document, you are getting a to do, and instead of calling this create document method, you will be calling this update document, and instead of data, which you were earlier passing in case of creating this document, you will be using the existing data to do to map the objects, right? Now you have updated. Now let's create a function to delete all the documents, or delete a single object first, delete a single to do first of all. So my delete function won't return anything, so let's have it a future void, but it would require the ID. So if we don't have the ID, how can we delete the particular document or a particular task? So this ID is required for this data of the document which we need to delete, and what we would return is simply database and call this delete document. So copy this all, paste it over here, and the one more field which we need to provide is a database document ID. Document ID is my ID, right? So I have create, I have fetch, I have create, I have update, I have delete. So the CRUD operation, which is create, read, update, delete, I have defined all the 4 operations. Now one more function which I will be creating is to delete all the available tasks into my document. So for that, let's call this function as delete all, and let's say I need to get all the documents first of all to able to delete it. So let's use documents dot not documents, sorry, databases dot list documents. So what does list documents do is get a list of all users document in a given collection, right? So let's just copy this, our database ID and document ID, and database ID and collection ID, sorry. So now once I get all my list documents, I might store it into my variable document, add a await keyword, mark this function as asynchronous, and just make this a future void. it won't return anything. Now I need to traverse over all the documents present in that data collection and delete it one by one. So let's use a simple for loop, and I would go for, let's say, what should it be? Okay, let's name this as document list. Document list dot the number of documents and its length. And I++. It's a simple for loop. Now await for all the databases to be deleted. Just call the delete document function. Now the delete document method takes 3 parameters, which are database ID, collection ID, and document ID. We have a database ID and document ID and a collection ID, right? Now it would also need my document ID. So for document ID, what I can do is, I have this document list, and my document list is getting traversed one by one using this for loop. So just accessing these documents, each index, and just accessing the ID. Now this will delete all the documents present in a user's database, and my to do services class is done. And now we can move towards the UI part, how we can fetch all the documents and show it onto a screen, right? So this is our home screen, and we will be showing all the documents into our home screen. So this is our home screen. Now what I will do, I will first of all create an empty list of to-dos, right? Now this is the to-do which will be fetched, updated, or delete, or changed during the app, so that I can have different kinds of I can update the to-do according to this. I will update this to-do into my different kinds of methods. Now I would also need an input controller to because I would be also entering different tasks into the same screen, right? So let's say I have an editing controller. What else do I need? I might also need a task completion filter. Like I would have a switch, and clicking on that switch will filter all the tasks present in this database to whether it's completed or it's not completed. So let's name is task completed filter, and by default it would be set to false. After this task completed filter, I would be needing one more variable. Okay, let's see if we need it or not. Let's create a function and give it a name as fetch to-dos, and create another function which says, let's say, upload to-dos. Probably we'll define these functions in a while. Before that, let's create a simple UI for our app home screen, right? So we have a center widget, and let's just remove this part. And inside a safe area, we have a child of as a column. Give its main axis alignment of start, and it would have, let's start adding children. Now in the center it would be having a child. Now I have imported this asset, and I would be using this asset at the top of my screen just so that my UI looks better. So let's use image.asset. The name of my asset is assets/todo.png, and I would give it a width of, let's say, 100. Okay, it says assets todo.png not found. Might be because I need to run pub get again. So let's just run pub.get. Let's just save our app once more. Okay, let's just scrap that and restart our application. Okay, we have a login screen. Let's log in. Okay, I've put a wrong email ID. Let's log in. Okay, let's wait. Or do I need to? Okay, let me just check the email ID with which I've created my account. It's rohit@x.com. Okay. And my password, I just don't remember which password I have used, so let's see. Okay, that's strange. Assets todo.png not found. Let's just verify the path once again. Alright, the issue is resolved. Just restart our application and you would be good to go. Now I have an center widget. What I need one thing more is, let's just add a bit of spacing. Let's say of 20 pixels. Then in the center I'm using a padding of edge insets.all. Let's say provide a padding now. Let's just create a small prompt of probably something like on your mind. Write it down, and provide it a bit of styling. Font size of, let's say, 30, and font weight and make sure your text is aligned to center. Right, good to go. Now let's just add a bit of padding. Not padding. Okay, now this is my center widget. Create a bit of spacing. And create a text field, a simple text field, right, which would have a controller as your input controller, and your text input action would be to send. So change your text input action to send, and on submit we would be getting a value. We won't be using that value, but we'll do something once our the text field, that user enters the text and he clicks on submit, something should happen, and that something is that the to do should be pushed into our database. We would be defining this function of upload to do and then calling this upload to do inside our on submitted function, right? Now let's give it some kind of decoration. If you save this file, you see this text field, right? It doesn't look so good, so let's give it a bit of decoration and use a simple input decoration. The first thing I would like to have it is a border. It would be an outline border. Having a border side. And what else do we need? Let's say a focus border of outline input border, hint text, let's say I need to add an emoji of think and kind of something like this, and a prompt like, okay, just let me make this as a double inverted commas. What's your plan? Alright, this looks much better. And we'll also have a suffix icon, so that even if user clicks on that icon, the to do which he or she has typed gets updated into our database. So let's just add a simple icon. Alright, this looks much better. And one more thing which I can do is to provide it a padding from sides. Or let's say just provide it a symmetric padding from the sides of, let's say, 15. Okay, 25 not. This would be 15, right? Okay, good to go. Now what's our next step? Our next step is to define a function which would add to-dos into my database, right? So I have named that function as submit to do. So where is my submit to do? Okay, this is my submit to do, or you can say upload to do. Let's create a messenger. It's like a simple messenger that we created for our authentication, which would show me, which would show me any kind of errors. And it will be dot of context, right? Create a try and catch block. Now you need to import this todos.dart, like this to do services, create an object of this class, and then access different methods like create, fetch, update, etc. So how can we do that? It's fairly simple, right? Just create a service, let's say name it a to-do service, and call your class. So inside your try block, you can use to do service to fetch all the to-dos, right? Now what do we need to do once we fetch our to-dos? Let's store this to-dos into a result. Let's call it a result, and this result, the to-dos which we are getting from the database, should update this value of to-dos, right? And we are using set state so that our UI get updated as soon as our to-dos are fetched from our database. So let's assign this to a final. Okay, what else do we have? The value of to-do future can be some value of to-do, try changing the variable passing that. Okay, we'll fix that error. Now inside my catch state, use your messenger to show a snack bar in case of any error, and this would be my own snack bar, and this would just take the error message and print it, right? Now we'll also have a finally block which would set state, and what we'll be using this is to make sure any kind of services are running inside our app or not, right? So for that we'll have an flag of is loading, which would be initially true, and once it's done loading, we'll set it to false. Okay, alright, now this upload to-dos should be called as soon as my homepage screen is rendered, right? And which is the method is, what's the name of the method which is rendered as soon as my home screen is built? Is the init method, right? So let's override our init method, and what we are going to do is we have to schedule a callback from a frame, right? Why? Because we need to update our UI as soon as we are done fetching the data from a database. So we'll be using something as widget binding its instance, and then add post frame callback. Now this timestamp would be an empty, and inside this we will calling a function so that we can fetch all our to-dos. Okay, so I guess this function should be named as fetch to-dos. By mistake I have wrote the function for fetching the to-dos, not uploading the to-dos, right? So this is my fetch to-dos, and we'll define our fetch to-dos once again. And this is my fetch to do. I have to define my upload to do, right? And let's just call fetch to do over here, and we have this error, right, which says this result value of future list to do can't be assigned. Okay, so a simple fix for this is to add the await keyword and mark this function as asynchronous, right? This is the method which will does our task of fetching all the to-dos or all the documents from our database. Now what I need to do is upload my to-do as soon as I enter some data or enter some kind of prompt into my into this field, right? So how can I upload any kind of to-dos? So it would be fairly simple. Let's create and try and catch block. Use your to-do services dot create. As you know, we have defined a create function which would just take the content and upload the document into a database. Okay, so it requires some content. We'll be passing everything it needs. So the content would be simply the input controller's text. So let's just type input controller dot text, and as soon as the to do has been created, make sure to empty the field. So we'll just define input controller as empty and set the state. Now this state, as soon as we add a to do into a database, it would also add that to do into my local to do's variable of this list of to do, right? So how we can do that? That's simple, right? We can do to do's dot add, and the to do which will be returned, we can store it into a value known as new to do. This would obviously be await and mark this function as asynchronous. And let's just add that to do which we will be returning from the database. Now simply just use this messenger in case of any error. Let's just copy this. And what else do we have? And the same case, we would need a finally, and inside finally we would be setting a state of is loading to false. Now we need one more text. Now let's suppose if the input which the user has entered is empty, or currently the app is in the state of loading, right? Then we don't want any kind of operations to take place. So let's just handle that edge case. Now if this input controller text is empty, or if the current state of my screen is loading, then just return the application, return the control towards back to the project, right? I guess that's it. Now we need to call this function upload to do. Where do we need to call this? Anyone? Where do we need to call this? We need to call this first of all on this place, which is this icon button, and let's call this function upload to do. And the second place which it would be called would be on submitted. Right. Now let's see if we can add some kind of data to our app. So let's say my first task and click or enter. Okay, I don't see any errors. Let's go to my Appwrite console, click on database, my collection, and looks like we don't have any collections yet. Let's see if I have any errors. Okay, I don't have any errors. Let's just restart my app. So what you need to do is, into your Appwrite console, just make this ID from required to not required type of variable, type of attribute, just for the purpose of testing. And let's just enter a task and click on insert. Looks like we don't have any errors. Let's go on to documents, and you can see we have a document as task 1 created over here, right? And by default it's is complete is set to false. Now we are able to insert our documents into our database, right? Now we need to fetch our documents into our database. This is a function which we have created to fetch to-dos, right? Now we would just simply display all the to-dos present into our database into your screen. That's a fairly simple task. What you can do is, into your text field, you just need to check if to-dos dot is not empty. If it's not empty, then you can create a list view, and we would be creating a list view dot builder. It won't have any padding, so let's set it to 0. We would have an item builder. Item builder would be context, and it would also require an index. Right. Now, what would be the item count for this item builder? It would be the length of the to-dos present in our document or into our database, right? Simple. Now, what I need to do is I need to define a prototype for how my list would look like. So if you hover over this, what you will see is specifying an prototype is more efficient than letting the children determine their own extent, because the scrolling machinery can make use of forced knowledge of the children's extent to save work. So this is generally used to increase the performance of the list view. Now, to create a list view, I would be using my custom list view, or you can say list type. So inside my widgets folder, I would be creating a file as todo tile dot, and let's just quickly create this. It would be a stateless widget, and it would simply return a list style, and we would tweak this list style according to our needs. Right. Now, what kind of parameters would it take? It would take a to do, it would take a callback, and that callback would be to toggle whether this task has been completed or not. Like, we can mark whether this to do has been completed or not, and we need a callback to delete this to do. Now let's just add all the formal parameters. All the fields are required in this case, but let's just okay. Now, how would we be building this to do? Let's give this list style a bit of styling. So it would have a rectangular border. So, it's just a simple UI, and I won't waste my time explaining this UI. So I will just pause my video, build this UI, and then just return back. Alright, so this is the kind of UI which we'll be using. It would have a rectangular border, an icon button which would have a checkbox to check whether that to-do has been completed or not, and an icon button to delete that to-do. If the user wants to delete that to-do, he can click on that icon, and a checkbox to mark that to-do as complete. Simple, right? Now we'll be using that to-do to build our list view dot builder. So that would be my to-do list style. So what's the name of? Okay, it's to-do list style. Let's just import it. And what does it need? It needs a to-do. So my to-do would be to-do dot first. right? And now let's just build my to do. So it would be to do list style. It would take a to do. That to do would be the current to do present in that index. What else do we need? We need a toggle. Now this toggle would be to set the state. First of all, we need to set the state to loading and then perform any current operation. So mark this function as asynchronous. We will be creating a messenger. Scaffold messenger. Out of context. Now the to do which is currently being accessed, we need to mark access is complete function and just reverse its current state. Like if it's already marked as completed, make it as not completed, and if it's not completed, convert it into a completed to do. So let's just do that. It's index dot is completed, right? Now let's update that value into a database. So click on final, let's say final updated. My to do services dot update, and it would be updating a to do. Which to do it would be updating? The to do present at the particular index. Right, now I need to set the state for the current to do, which is my local variable, local to do. So I would just mark it as the updated to do. I will update the list according to the data which I am getting from the database. Now suppose if there is any error regarding all this process, we need to make sure that the to do is restored to its original position. So let's just say its to do index is complete is of right, and then just display any error. And in my finally, I would set my state of loading to false. And I will return this to. Let's just reload our app and check whether if we can fetch the to-dos present in our database into our app screen. So click on login. It would be I will be using my credentials. Click on login and we got some error. Let's see. Okay, we are using a column inside of list view, that's why we got this error. So how we can fix it is by providing us property known as string wrap equal to true. Save it, and as you can see, the to do which was present into my collection task 1 is getting showed over here. So now let me try adding some different to do. Let's say task 2 and reload my document. So as you can see, this list is added in my database as well as this is updated onto my app screen. Now you can just mark it as completed, reload this, go to my task 1 and into my data section, I can see that is completed is marked as 2, and if I just delete the task 2, okay, I'm not able to delete, I guess. Okay, let's see why we can't delete our function, delete our to-dos. Alright, we haven't defined any method for deleting our to-do. So that would be fairly simple, I guess. If this is my to-do for deleting, this would be my function for toggle, this would be my function for deleting, and okay, so this is my function for delete. What I'm simply doing is calling my to-do services delete function and passing this id index to remove that particular to-do at that particular index, right? And once that is done, I'm just updating the to-dos locally and into my database. So let's just restart my application. Let's just quickly log in. So once I log in, and let's just delete my task 2, and once I delete, if I reload my database, so as you can see, the task 2 is currently being deleted. Now we are only left with two functionalities. One is to delete all tasks with a single click, and secondly to filter the task depending upon whether it's completed or not completed, right? So let's just quickly add that functionalities. So I won't be setting much kind of a UI, but for both the purposes, before write it down, after write it down, I would be creating a row which would contain both these functions. Inside my child, I'm having this, and let's say it's my own snack bar. Save it, and you can see there is a button. Let's make sure it's on center, right? So if let me add some random task. We will be fixing that flow indicator, right? Now if you click on this delete function, this will delete only a single task, but if you click on this cross function, it will delete all the tasks present in the document. If you click on reload, you can see there are no currently tasks because this button deleted all the currently present tasks, right? Now to solve that render flow error, what you have to do is wrap this column wrap this column with a widget known as single child scroll view, right? Now we have left with only one functionality, that is to filter the tasks which are completed or not completed. So for that I would be using a fairly simple kind of logic. Onto my return to do list, what I will first check is if task completed filter is currently on or not. If it's not on, like if it's on, then I would check if the task currently present in that to do is completed or not, or it's marked as completed or not. If it's marked completed, I would be rendering the to do, else I would not be rendering the to do. And lastly, if none of those works, like if the task completed filter is switched off, then I don't need to check for any kind of whether the to do is being completed or not. I would just simply render my to do. Now just to add a simple toggle button for rendering my to do rendering toggling my task completed filter. Beside my button to clear all the tasks, I would be adding this button. So this is my filter, right? So let's say I'm adding some to dos. This is my first to do, this is my second to do, this is my third to do, and this is my fourth to do. Right now, if I mark this to do as completed and switch on this filter, you can see only the tasks which are not completed as being shown in my screen. If I currently switch off this, all my to dos are showing, and as you can see, I can delete this to do. I can just switch on this filter, and I can also delete all the to dos with a single click. So that's how you can create your own to do application using Flutter and Appwrite as a server for your app. Thank you for watching this series. I hope you learned something, and see you soon again.